Today's Politics Live.
It's Friday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Leaders were put on the spot last night on election betting allegations and supporting Jeremy Corbyn.
I was incredibly angry to learn of these allegations.
It wasn't a question that really arose because I didn't think we were going to win the election. I was campaigning for the Labour Party.
But out campaigning today in Wales, will any of it impact the course of the election? Also, we'll be speaking to the Workers' Party of Britain about their manifesto. And reforming the House of Lords, is Labour's compulsory retirement age the way to go? Joining us today, the chair of the London Assembly, Conservative Andrew Boff, Labour peer Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, The Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Soda and the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson. This is Politics Live Election 2024. And welcome to viewers on the iPlayer, BBC Two and the News Channel. So, after a week of campaigning, that debate, the Question Time debate with a live audience, putting party leaders through their paces, was obviously quite strenuous for all of them. What about for our panel? Did you watch, and what was most striking for you?
Yes, I did. I think what struck me was the fact that Rishi Sunak seemed to answer questions, and during...
That's the aim, I suppose, isn't it, to answer the questions?
Well, no, I chair the London Assembly. I know that people in front of me try their best not to answer questions. Fiona Bruce did very well on holding people to account. But it did strike me that Keir Starmer's session was a masterclass in how not to ask a question, because I'm no clearer about what he thinks, for example, about whether or not Jeremy Corbyn would have been a great leader, because he never answered the question.
Shami? What was most striking for you?
Guess what? I completely disagree.
Funny that.
I thought isn't that surprising? Look,
Yes.
I thought that Rishi Sunak, in contrast actually with all the other three, seemed so cross at having to face the audience. Their challenges to him were almost impertinent. At times he was angry, not even tetchy Rishi, as we've heard before. The other three did their best to approach the audience with some humility. All three of them, including in the more awkward bits. As to the story of the day, that shock horror, hold the front page. Did you know that Keir Starmer actually served in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet and campaigned with him at 2 general elections, as if that is some kind of revelation?
Right. Well, the question, of course, was slightly different. Before I come to our other guests, let's just get a flavour of some of the questions that were put to the leaders, particularly on the issue of trust.
Hi. We've had 5 Prime Ministers in the last 7 years, and one of them managed to last for 6 weeks. As a result, I think we are something of an international laughingstock. I'm asking if you would confess to us tonight, even just a small amount of embarrassment, to be leading the Conservative Party into this election campaign.
When I first got this job, I stood on the steps of Downing Street and spoke to all of you as Prime Minister for the first time, and I acknowledged that. I said very clearly that mistakes had been made, and that's why I was standing there in front of you.
You said he would make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it, or did you have your fingers crossed behind your back?
Look, I didn't think we would win that election.
You said that, but irrespective of that, you said he'd make a great Prime Minister. Did you mean it?
It wasn't a question that really arose because I didn't think we were going to win the election. And now,
but we all heard you. We all heard you saying he would be a great Prime Minister. That was your way of telling the people here, vote for him. Did you not mean that?
I was campaigning for the Labour Party. And I'm glad I did.
But you also campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
I was campaigning for the Labour Party. I was a Labour politician.
In 2010, your party promised to abolish tuition fees, and that was the centre of your campaign. Now, students like myself are burdened with hundreds of thousands of pounds of student debt. How can my generation trust you?
I understand why your generation lost faith in us. It was a difficult government to be in. Explained I had choices whether we came out of it and cart from the sidelines or try to get there and win things. We didn't win everything and we lost that one.
Given the recent scandals and dramas with the SNP, how will you differ from your predecessors and project competence?
It has been a turbulent time, and I'd be the first to accept that and to admit that. So My party's asked me to lead it through this election campaign and beyond the 2026 parliamentary elections to essentially do two things. To first of all, rebuild trust between the electorate and the Scottish National Party, and I've always worked throughout my political life to build trust and confidence with the electorate that have chosen me. And secondly, to provide the direction that's necessary in the Scottish Government to change people's lives.
John Swinney, their leader of the SNP. On this question of trust, it came up repeatedly. I mean, even referencing tuition fees, that promise to abolish them by the Liberal Democrats. What did you make of that broadly across the piece?
I was struck by how both Rishi Sunak and John Swinney got the same sort of question. You made a mess of your party. How can you be trusted to run the country? Now, Rishi Sunak was saying, look, forget all these other guys. It's me. I'm standing before you. I'm just a boy asking a voter to love him, you know? And that doesn't wash, because this is the fundamental problem with the Conservative campaign. The Conservative government, the party in 2019, asked for the vote, and voters are entitled to pass judgment on the whole lot of them. And this kind of forget about the other guys, I don't think works. And John Swinney didn't have an answer for the fact that his party is in Bedlam, so how is that a manifesto for independence? So you could see the voters, you could feel, you could almost hear in their silence being unconvinced by those answers.
I mean, the National Centre for Social Research reported last week, Sonia, that 45% of voters would almost never trust British governments of any party to place the needs of the nation above the interests of their own political party more than ever before. Now, trust has always been a movable feast in terms of trust in politicians. But is that dispiriting, and is it reflected in the debate last night?
Of course it's dispiriting to see levels of trust in politics that low, and I think it does reflect a general anti-politics mood in the country and a lack of enthusiasm for politics. So I think it is concerning. In some ways it's not surprising, I think, after sort of the 14 years that we've had. I think, you know, one elephant in the room when it comes to trust was people were promised through Brexit that things would improve. That hasn't happened, and I think politicians are being held accountable for that. One concern I've got, though, is if you listen to an economist like Paul Johnson, he says that both parties are engaged in a conspiracy of silence about some of the tough fiscal trade-offs, financial trade-offs that the country faces. And one concern I do have is that I think that's right. I think when you look 20 or 30 years hence, they're even tougher as a result of an ageing population and changing demographics. And it doesn't, perhaps a general election campaign isn't the time for it, but it doesn't feel like politicians are fronting up with voters about those tough trade-offs. I think people can sniff that out, and I do think it turns them off politics when people make promises and the public are like, oh, but can you really keep them?
Right, but that question, Shami Chakrabarti, about Keir Starmer saying that Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister in 2019. That was sort of channeling this issue of trust. Do we trust him? Is he being honest about it? Why can't he answer that question straight?
I think to some extent maybe the mistake was a couple of weeks back with the gratuitous jibe at the Tory manifesto for being too much like Corbyn. You know, I do think it's time not for the putative Prime Minister, as I hope Keir Starmer is, not to be constantly defining himself in opposition or in sympathy with past leaders of the party and go forward on his programme and his slogan for change. Not change from back then and, you know, the current candidate for Islington, the independent candidate for Islington North, but defining himself in relation to where the country is now and what it needs in the future.
There's something much more fundamental than this. You know, politicians are just people, with people who stand for office, and people make mistakes. What annoys the public more than anything is when you've made a mistake, you don't own up to it. You don't say, look, actually, what Keir Starmer could have said is, I made a judgment at the time about Jeremy Corbyn and it was wrong, because I don't think... He could have said that.
But he also said, under pressure...
Whereas Rishi has apologised.
Let Shami answer on
He also said... Granted, under pressure, and I do think it's telling that the so-called awkward moment was about this stuff and not about policy, where he actually did quite well.
But it is about trust.
No, I guess it. OK, so you know, he said under perhaps a little bit of pressure, he would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson, which is frankly faint praise. But I do agree that there probably wouldn't have been a corrupt VIP lane for COVID contracts and partying number 10 while the elderly died alone in care homes.
Right, we're just going to...
It would have been great news for the Jewish population.
We'll come back to your thoughts, because I want to talk to you about Rishi Sunak and his response in terms of the Gambling Commission, looking into a couple of Conservative candidates. But let's pick up with that, because he was very angry. He said he was very angry about that in the debate last night. Jess Parker, political correspondent for the BBC, is travelling alongside the Prime Minister. What's the mood?
Hello, Joe. Yes, I'm on the bus with the Prime Minister in North Wales. The Prime Minister isn't always on the Conservative Party campaign bus, but we are on board with him and hopefully might get a little bit more of a chat with him later. In terms of the mood, look, he just spoke to an audience of, I'm told, activists and supporters, so they were very supportive of him. In terms of what he was talking about, the Conservatives like to lay into Labour's record in Wales, so there was quite a lot of that from the Prime Minister and other speakers as well. Again, though, he was making these interesting comments about saying he understood that voters and people are frustrated with the Conservatives and indeed with him, acknowledging that mistakes have been made, but also repeated this line as well, saying people shouldn't sleepwalk into this election and let Labour waltz into Downing Street. So I think really trying to, again, grab voters' attention with these kinds of narratives. It plays into those warnings as well we heard from the Conservatives over the last week or so about what they say could be a Labour super majority. Of course, there is criticism of this political tactic as to whether it's a good idea or not, but it's certainly something that he was repeating today here in North Wales.
And was there any development? Have there been any developments and any more response to the gambling watchdog looking into a second Conservative candidate? Yes, Jess.
Yeah, sorry, Jay, there's a little bit of break up there on the line. Look, there were some valiant attempts by journalist colleagues, including from the BBC and others, to try and ask the Prime Minister for a little bit more detail. So, in terms of these betting allegations. So he was asked when he had found out about these allegations. He was asked if, in principle, by Sky News, our colleagues here, if he was comfortable with Conservative candidates placing bets on the date of the general election. And he was asked again about pressure to suspend those candidates. He really did stick to his script, the Prime Minister, on this one, really didn't want to be drawn into the details, and so repeated that he was angry about the allegations, said they were serious matters and being investigated by authorities. But no doubt, I think journalists will keep having a go to see if they can get a little bit more detail out of Rishi Sunak, as will I, given I'm on the bus with him at the moment.
All right, well, good luck, Jess Parker. Thank you very much. We can see Rishi Sunak campaigning out today, and goodbye to you there, Jess Parker. On this, Andrew, should the Tory party withdraw support from these two candidates? That is the question that has been asked. We know that one of them, Craig Williams, did place a bet on the timing of the election a few days before it was announced. He's admitted it. He said it was an error of judgment. Should he be suspended as a candidate?
I don't know. I don't know the details enough. And if it was that he had inside information, and we don't know that. We don't know that. If he had inside information and placed a bet, he certainly should be suspended.
But not on the basis of an error of judgment in placing a bet in the first instance.
I think that was pretty stupid, really. I mean, one of the things we've got to do with whichever way, whoever gets elected as members of Parliament in the next Parliament, is we need to beat them over the head with the Nolan principles and make sure they memorise them.
So on that basis, he should have been suspended. We've been talking about trust on the basis of who liked who and who served in whose shadow cabinet, but not on the
justice.
But not on the.
There's also justice as well. Natural justice says...
thank you for that. Yeah. I have been a lawyer for 30 years, and I would suggest...
Would you hang on to people before they're found guilty? Is that what lawyers do?
It is normal practice when there's a serious allegation of this kind, even in a normal employment scenario, to suspend somebody pending that criminal...
But if you do that, if suspend he's not going to be an MP if he doesn't stand for election, right?
He's already apologised for the error of judgment. The error of judgment should be enough for the purposes of suspension at this point.
Oh, my Lord, we'd all have to to resign over error.
Well, let's wait. Parties do take.
I'm
Andrew,
not faultless like yourself.
Andrew, parties do take decisions. They may be right or wrong decisions about what they do about candidates, and that decision hasn't been taken, and we've discussed.
I think it's enough to say that he is furious. When he said he was furious, I was furious when I heard about this, and every Conservative Party member was furious.
But I thought what was so striking about his answer, though, was, he said he was angry, and it almost sounded like he thought of himself as a victim in this. Yeah. Some of these are people that he's chosen to surround himself with. So there are questions about his judgment, not just the judgment of the people.
Are questions.
I think you're completely right, Sonia. Here we're looking at basically the decay of the Conservative Party organisation. I mean, there can't be that many people who knew about the election, and it's staggering to think he had around him people willing to bet on the information, but nobody to advise him on the date in the first place. Somebody should have said, look, July's a disaster. He lacked people to be able to tell him that, but he had no end of people going down the bookies.
I rather wish I'd been in his office, because my bet was 10th of October. I've lost that money.
Well, let me just.
It's not a laughing matter.
No, but let me just move on briefly onto this headline in The Guardian. I was a Tory minister, but I think we need a Labour government. This is Chris Skidmore, who actually was the Conservatives' net zero czar, I suppose you would call him. Is it a surprise?
No, not in the least. I mean, I had to be reminded that he was a member of the Conservative Party. He spent the past few years actually arguing against us, especially with our position in London, where he decided to take a completely different position from the rest of us. So I'm not in the least surprised. People change their minds. I just wish they'd do it while they weren't MPs.
I think this makes an important point. Chris Skidmore is a green lobbyist right now. I think laws should be passed. So ministers who take on an environmental brief should be banned from acting as lobbyists or profiting from that position. I mean, now he's a professor of ecology at Bath University or something. This is a bag-carrying history graduate who's, via politics, been transformed into a very lucrative career. And here, I just think this is what places politics and mistrust.
Is being a professor of ecology a really lucrative career? There are probably quite a few academics who disagree with you.
That is on the sideline to his consultancy, for which he abandoned his constituents, forced them into a by-election.
Are you saying people shouldn't have second jobs? I mean, we've had endless discussions about whether politicians should have second jobs, and many do.
I think there's a real problem now with politicians getting into a brief from which they later profit. I think there should be a ban on working for foreign governments like David Cameron did, a ban on working as a lobbyist as Chris Skidmore did, because the voters will think you're making laws simply to feather your nest after you leave politics.
All right. Next Wednesday, Michelle Hussain, my colleague, will be hosting a head-to-head debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer in front of a live audience in Nottingham. If you have a question for the party leaders, you can contact BBC Your Voice, Your Vote via the BBC website. You can see all the details there. That is next Wednesday at 8:15. Now, across the course of the election campaign, you will have noticed, as keen Politics Live observers, we've been speaking to representatives of several smaller political parties on an almost daily basis. Today, we're talking to the Workers' Party of Britain. It's running in its first general election with 152 candidates. Let's speak to Hoz Shafi, who is the National Campaign Manager of the party, and he's in our Westminster studio. Welcome to you. Hoz, we've asked representatives of all of the parties to give a short, sort of 30-second pitch of your offer to voters. So perhaps you'd like to go ahead.
I would say to you that we're a necessity that's been born out of the politics that we've had in the last 49 odd years, where we've seen the Labour Party fracture and move further right. We're a left-leaning socialist party. We believe in looking after everyone. We're about taking everyone with us. We're not part of the, what's the best way of putting it, the Thatcherite way of, the individual over society. We are people that want the whole of the country to go together, including the poor, including veterans, including the middle class as well, that are becoming the poor at the moment.
All right, well, your 30 seconds is pretty well up. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has been central to the campaigning by your party in this election. Yeah. But what can you really achieve? The government will be formed either by the Conservatives or the Labour Party. That is the most likely outcome. What can you do to actually change their policies when it comes to Gaza?
Well, at the moment, as the polls are the way they're going, there's not a lot that we can do about what's going to happen. It looks like the Labour Party is going to win a huge majority. We want to just make sure that it's not as big as it is. We feel that it is unhealthy for a party to have a 400-seat majority, because they can do whatever they want to do without any kind of pullback from the rest of the people in the country. Now, Labour are not saying what they're doing. All they're doing is waiting for the Tory party that has disintegrated to be replaced by them. And that's all it is. It's
Right.
literally...
But I was asking what you're proposing in terms of a policy around the Israel-Gaza conflict, because, as I say, the leader, George Galloway, has made it fairly central to his campaign.
All I can say is that we are fighting for the people of Gaza. We're out there demonstrating every single day, but policy-wise, we're a very small party. There's not a lot we can do other than put early day motions in. And all we can do is try and be the conscience of what I feel to be a parliament that has become a psychopath, and a parliament that has become a psychopath through the fact that it's decided that what is happening in Gaza is normal. What's happening to the people of Gaza is normal.
I don't think the politicians of mainstream parties would characterise it in that way, but I will ask them in just a moment. Would you prefer a Conservative or a Labour government?
Neither. I don't see any difference between either of them.
All right.
It's literally just changing. All it is, imagine like the chairs on the Titanic. That's what we're looking at. Let's swap chairs over the Titanic, because you have a Tory and have a Labour in. It makes no difference. That ship is sinking. This country of ours is going down, and it's going down. And I don't mean financially, I mean morally. We're bankrupt. We're part of an organisation or a country that has seen it fit to support a genocide.
All right, but Hoz, is there any hope coming from the Workers' Party of Britain?
The only hope I've got is that I hope that people take the opportunity, because every time we hear about this is a democracy, now we've got to vote for the Labour or Tories or this, that and the other. I suggest you vote for, wherever there is a Workers' Party person, vote for them.
All right.
If there isn't a Workers' Party person, vote for the independents, because we can't allow a Labour Party to basically have 400-seat majority.
All right. Hoz, Shafi, thank you very much for joining us. Let's pick up on that with you, Shami Chakrabarti. Listening to that, how will you persuade people who would like the issue of Gaza and the conflict there at the forefront of the campaign and have lost faith in a Labour Party on this issue?
Look, to have any kind of influence on the world stage, as this relatively small country that we are now outside of Europe and so on, to have any influence, you have to be in government. I think that is Mr. Galloway's party, is it not?
Yes.
We heard, you know, they want an economic reset and all the rest of it. What we didn't hear about was the rather hateful homophobic views that Galloway has repeatedly put on the electoral map. I think George Galloway is a shapeshifter rather akin to Nigel Farage. And he knows about division, and he knows about. Sometimes he goes to a constituency and tells the Muslims.
He's not here to answer if you're going to make specific allegations about him.
I think this is the politics of division, and it is a form of anti-politics. It's not actually a way to bring forward sensible change, either in Britain or on the world stage.
But sorry, Sonia.
Well, other policies that the Workers' Party of Great Britain has got as well that we didn't discuss is they want to take the UK out of NATO. They want to cut spending on a nuclear deterrent. So there are huge security issues as well in terms of what they're saying. And I find it really hard to take credibly anyone from the left, actually, who comes on and says there's no difference between a Conservative and a Labour government. Look at the Labour government's track record between 1997 and 2010 on something like child poverty, and then look at what's happened to child poverty in the last few years in this country. I mean, there is a huge difference.
Right, but there is pressure coming from both the left to Labour and reform on the right to the Conservatives, not just the Workers' Party of Britain, the Greens primarily, particularly on some of these issues. And there may well be people who think, I can't see any difference between the mainstream parties. I'll go left and right.
Of course, Keir Starmer, all he's done over the last few years is pretty much abandon his various policies until there's almost nothing there to point to. Now, I'm surprised the Workers' Party isn't doing better because, of course, there is a very strong depth of feeling on the Gaza issue. Well, but it seems to be the Greens rather than the Workers' Party who are successfully attacking Labour from the left. If you look at how the Greens are campaigning in Bristol Central, which they may well win, they're using the Palestinian flag in some of their literature. You know, they're basically taking that, and also they're talking about saying, oh, the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer, etc. Which, by the way, is untrue. The lowest paid have done the best in the last 14 years, and the highest paid have done the worst.
Right. I mean, does it worry you in terms of that pressure from the left, not necessarily from the Workers' Party of Britain, but the Green Party?
It is not yet evident that it is worrying enough, perhaps, to significantly alter the outcome of the election. I think there are a lot of people in the Green Party who I wish were in the Labour Party. I wish they didn't feel it necessary to fragment the coalition in that way. But the Green Party, unlike the Workers' Party, does not peddle the kind of hateful politics in particular communities that Mr Galloway has done throughout his career.
It's quite interesting. Up till a few months ago, we were talking about tactical voting as ways of getting rid of the Conservative government. I mean, as we see the polls now, the tactical voting is really about how we ensure that any future Labour government is held to account. And so people like the Green Party, who are, let's face it, much more authentically socialist and left-wing than the Labour Party is now. I don't really see the Labour Party as a socialist party anymore. And yet we've absolutely...
It's a social democratic party.
Yeah, we absolutely know that there are plenty of people in this country who actually like socialism, who they believe in it.
Well, let Shami respond and then I'll come
to the Greens are actually much more authentic voice for that than Labour is now.
It's good to hear your advice about socialism, but do you not think...
Well, it's my granddad's advice, who was a founder member of the Labour Party.
But do you not think that, well, if he was a founder member, he will have recognised the Labour Party as a broad coalition?
He would have recognised the party standing up for working people and believed in socialism. And I respected him for that, as we all should.
And I respected and continue to respect rule of law, one nation Conservatives who do not brand the European Court of Human Rights as a foreign court because it sits in Strasbourg.
So we're talking about socialism. It's not that dirty a word, and people are entitled to have a party that
Absolutely.
represents it. And I'm just saying that Labour doesn't, and the Workers' Party and the Green Party, they do.
The Labour Party, from its inception, as you know, has always been a broad coalition. It has had to be, because when you are doing mass movement politics for people who do not inherit wealth and power, you have to move in broad coalitions.
There's a point about being a broad coalition. If you take away, in order to accommodate as many people as you can, you actually take away the meaning of the party.
That just simply isn't true.
Hang on.
In the first-past-the-post system, parties of the left and parties of the right, they win by building a broad coalition of voters and appealing to the centre as well as their left and as well as their right. That is exactly what Keir Starmer's Labour Party has done, and that is what we need. That's what he needs to do to win a general election.
He's moved to the right.
He's done exactly the same as David Cameron did with the Conservatives.
He's moved significantly to the right, but there's massive space to the left.
Right. Well, hang on. We're going to.
What about the Conservative Party?
We're going to just come on to. We're just going to come on to the Conservative Party, and you can ask precisely that question, Shami. Nick Robinson, my colleague, continues his series of interviews with the party leaders, and he'll be joined by the Reform Party leader, Nigel Farage, tonight at 7 p.m. on BBC One and on the BBC iPlayer. I said we would talk about the Conservative Party, and we are going to, because the polls, as you know, we may be able to show you the BBC poll tracker, have kept the Labour Party at least 20 points ahead of the Conservatives pretty well throughout this campaign and before. We've also had some more apocalyptic polls in terms of the outcome for the Conservatives, ranging from wipeout to this term super majority, but a very, very big majority. So it is no wonder that there has been discussion about the future of the Conservative Party. Awful lot of chatter about manoeuvrings in terms of future leaders post this election. Fraser, you are one of those who has been writing about it. Just looking at the narrative that was mentioned a bit earlier, a Labour landslide, prevent a Labour super majority. This idea that the Tories have already lost, it will be about minimising the damage. Do you think that's worked as a campaign tool?
Well, judging by the polls, nothing they're saying or doing is working. These polls are not narrowing, as people kept saying as the campaign goes on. And what we've instead seeing is Nigel Farage coming along and the Conservative vote splitting in two between the Tories and the Reform. We've now got two Conservative parties fighting this election, and that's never happened before. So that's what we're seeing here. It's not really the country shifting left. It's just the way that the votes are falling will give Keir Starmer a disproportional majority to the proportion of people voting Labour, which, by the way, early 40s, is not that big, but still enough to give him this. Now, the Conservatives, of course, they had two strategies. One is to pretend that they're going to win, and the other, and I know a couple of cabinet members who think they should be doing this, saying, look, we've already lost, but the most rational reason you have for voting Labour is to keep Keir Starmer's feet to the fire, don't give him too big a majority, make sure there's just more than a few dozen Tory MPs. Surely you prefer a more balanced parliament with 100, 200 Tory MPs. Now, that's a more coherent argument, I think, than pretending that Rishi Sunak is going to be in there implementing national service or whatever. But can you really fight if you're a governing party in an election on the premise that you've already lost?
Do you think the Tories are going to win?
No. No, I gave up on that about a month or so ago. I don't think they are. And but what's important, I don't understand this word supermajority.
No, well, let's not use it. A big majority.
It's
you're
a big
right.
majority.
Yep.
The thing about
it
doesn't work here. A big majority. What a big majority says is that you have fewer people to hold you to account. And one of the things that we do know is that when Labour come into if Labour come into power, which seems likely, is that our taxes are going to go up and they're going to put in stuff that they need to be held to account for. And if we haven't got those MPs sitting opposite them to hold them to account, that is a serious threat to democracy.
But what I wanted to come to was this broad church that we were talking about before. What's happened to the Conservatives' broad church? You say it's split in two for the first time ever.
Well, it also shrunk a lot over Brexit. So there were a lot of actually moderate Conservatives who either left the party or were pushed out.
You mean Remainers?
Purged. But they were Conservatives who were pushed out over the Brexit issue. And that is a very bad thing for a party. And I think that helps explain why the Conservative Party is in the state where it is today. Because if you have an ideological purge of your party and you push out some of the more centrist MPs, that's not great for your electoral prospects. And that's exactly what we've seen.
It worked out not badly in 2019.
I mean, that's true, but that election was done when the promise of Brexit was still there. It was a Brexit election. It had a very effective slogan. Brexit has not delivered what Boris Johnson said it was going to deliver, and now the Conservative Party are getting punished for it.
What I think is that some people in the existing Conservative Party, not even Reform, wanted to turn this election into a referendum on pulling out of the Convention on Human Rights. And Sunak has been leaning in that direction, showing ankle in that direction, but didn't actually come clean about it in his manifesto. And you saw that in the final question last night, when he really lashed out against the foreign court. That is a disgrace, and that is not in the best tradition of the British Conservative Party in its day, the most successful coalition electorally in Western democratic history.
I'm in
Shame on
agreeing
him.
with you.
Shame on him. Well, we need a one-nation Conservative Party.
You're really against a policy the Tories don't actually. Nobody is saying we should pull out of the ECHR.
Yes, they are.
But you're in danger of agreeing because...
I'm in danger of agreeing, not because we will, the Conservative Party will ever be pulling out of the ECHR. It's the most ridiculous proposal I've ever heard in my life, to join a club only inhabited by Russia and Belarus.
Well, some Conservatives don't think it's ridiculous.
And he did say last night that if it came
we're
to
in
a
a party, some of my party colleagues are wrong, and I will argue this to the grave. The point is that when you build a party, you have respect for each side. Each side has to have respect for the others. And what we have actually seen is a lack of respect for one nation Conservatives within the Conservative Party. That has happened, and after the election, they've got to be reminded. There has been no Conservative victory that hasn't been fought on the centre.
Fraser, is that your analysis of what will happen after the election? We don't know the outcome, of course, and anything can happen in the last few weeks of a general election campaign. But looking to some of the discussions that you've been having, does the party turn rightwards?
Well, that is a good question, because whatever remains of the Conservatives, about between a quarter of a third of the current Tory MPs will make it after the election. Think what Parliament's going to look like. But there's going to be between 50 and 150, depending on what these MRP polls say, out of a Parliament of 650. That's not very many. Nigel Farage, what's he going to have to show? He might get more votes from the Lib Dems, but the polls suggest he'll be lucky to fill a taxi with his MPs, far less take the fight to Labour. So you've got to reunite the right. That's the obvious thing with the Conservatives to do. And they'd have to accept that what's happened here is they've been going so long promising conservatism without really delivering it, promising tax cuts while pushing taxes up, that they've so disappointed a whole bunch of people who believed them when they promised smaller government and tax cuts, that they've rebelled against it. And I think the mistake there was thinking that you could actually talk right and move left and you wouldn't really suffer political punishment. Well, they have done now. And I don't really see it in terms of right or left. I think when you look at Nigel Farage's manifesto, it's not significantly to the right of the Conservative. It pretty much is a mirror Conservative manifesto. There's not a big ideological gap between these two.
I actually disagree with you on substance and rhetoric, though, because if you look at the track record of Conservative chancellors between 2010 and 2024, they cut tax credits and benefits directed at low-income working parents at the same time as making tax cuts that disproportionately benefited the better-off half of the income distribution. They effectively cut tax credits and they funded it through tax cuts.
I think that's the opposite of the truth. If you look at who's
it's not. There's
Well,
distributional analysis, Fraser.
Yeah, and I will bet you anything you like that analysis will show that the best paid did worst and the lowest paid did best.
No, what the analysis shows is that the average family in the bottom 10% of the income distribution lost £4,000 a year net on average as a result of tax benefits.
That's not right.
It is.
Not.
Fraser,
Well,
you just
hang on.
can't
You
assert
do- we
that my
will-
facts are wrong. The facts are right. I've written about them, and there's.
I've written about them
You
too.
two-
and
hang on,
written
can
about
I
different
interject?
texts.
Maybe you two-
Fiscal studies reports that show this.
You two could perhaps have this
Columnists
debate again, and we will play it out on the programme on this particular point.
We'll bring our respective reports.
You can bring your respective
Sure.
reports. Can I just
I'll send you mine.
ask one question on Labour? If Keir Starmer and the Labour Party win the election and get into government, how long is the honeymoon period going to be? Because there are a lot of people who say there isn't much difference between the two parties. What's your fear?
So my fear, it follows what Andrew was saying about one nation conservatism and what might happen if the Tories lurch to the right. You'll have a Labour government that's trying to be honest about the state of public finances. There are no magic wands to deliver everything that people need and are craving instantly. And if there is this hateful, far-right, Faragist politics coming either from Reform or from the Tory party itself, I think it could be a very, very unpleasant time for everyone in Britain.
I think the other thing that we're sort of underestimating as well, so there's all this talk of, Labour's projected very, very large majority. That does not necessarily lead to very happy internal politics in the Labour Party. So if you've got a very, very large majority, actually there will be some groups within the Labour Party who feel that they can rebel because there is a very large majority. Policies are going to pass anyway. So there may be some internal dynamics within the Labour Party as well, internal opposition, if you like, which may end up being a significant influencing factor.
Yes, and a big part of the opposition against a Labour government if, in fact, they win. Now, I have a question for you, which is how old is too old to keep on working? That question is obviously creating debate in various industries, and now it's hanging over the House of Lords because Labour have pledged that should they win the election, they would impose a retirement age of 80 on peers sitting in the upper chamber. Now, we can talk to Lord Alf Dubs. I'll ask him his age in a minute. No, I won't. He was born in Prague. In fact, you can work it out in 1932. There he is. Hello to you. Came to the UK on the Kinder Transport age 6, and throughout his career in the Commons and the Lords has been outspoken on many issues. But most significantly, we can see him here outside number 10 on the rights of refugees, securing an amendment, the Dubs Amendment, that helped 350 unaccompanied children settle in the UK. And this year, he drew national attention for holding the government to account over their treatment of refugee children arriving here in the UK. Welcome to you, Alf Dubs. Make a case for not having an age limit on the House of Lords.
Look, there are two things at least wrong with the House of Lords. One is it's far too large, and secondly, the method of appointment. On the method of appointment, we've seen some pretty corrupt practices of the sort of people that have been put in because they've been generous donors to the Conservative Party. So I think we've got to reform both the size of the Lords and indeed the method by which we get there. I personally believe there's only one answer, and that is to have an elected second chamber. And I'd like to see any changes that the Labour Party makes, the Labour government makes, is a short first step to having a proper reform of the Lords by way of an elected second chamber.
Right, well, Alf Dubs, our guest here, Sonia Soda, shaking her head.
No. So I think that if you do that, you'll just get another chamber of elected politicians and it would just be like another Commons. What I would do is I'd go for another form of radical reform. I would have citizens' juries make appointments of experts to the Lords. So you've still got expertise in the chamber. You've got a more popular element. I think it could work really well. I really like the fact that we've got experts, but I totally agree with Lord Dubs. I actually think that there's that lifetime peerages are used as awards on both sides of the political aisle for basically people's mates, for people who've been MPs. It's absolutely ridiculous that people get the privilege of lifetime sitting in our legislature as a result of having friends in the right places. That shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Alf?
Well, look, of course, I repeat, I think we should be elected. The problem with expertise is this, that the foremost expert in, say, nuclear physics knows nothing more than any of the rest of us do about unemployment, the health service, planning, education, and so on. Expertise doesn't last very long once you've left the field in which you're an expert. I think what a legislature needs is experts to advise the legislators. That's how I'd like to see it, and that's why I don't move away from having an elected second chamber.
Right.
And if we could have a different method of election, so it wouldn't quite be like the Commons, but there's no harm in that, provided we're democratically accountable.
All right, but let me, until that is discussed in detail, depending on what happens in this election, Alf Dubs, what about this age limit of 80? Is it a good idea or isn't it? You're 91.
Well, okay, so I'm going on programmes as being the token old person in the Labour Party. Thank you. Look, I'm not going to defend my position as long as I can be replaced by an active, committed person who will take over, and that's not the present system.
Well, hang on. Fraser, I think the fact that you're in the Lords, Alf, is actually a sign that there shouldn't be an age limit. You've achieved a huge amount in the areas in which
Fraser's going to defend.
There's nothing token about Lord Dubs here. He has been one of the most effective hellraisers, if you like, in Parliament.
Absolutely.
And he actually embodies why he's wrong, actually. Because what you need is people like him in there who are original. And the House of Lords doesn't work in theory, but it works in practice.
Right.
And just as we don't want to impose retirement on David Attenborough, we don't want to impose retirement on David Attenborough for what he does for the environment.
So you think it's a bad idea?
And what he does for refugees is up there with David.
Here because it's ageist. What are we going to do? Are we going to, once we've done the House of Lords, are we going to say the monarch has to retire?
As I say, he's the David Attenborough of refugees, and so I don't think the BBC is going to be calling for the early departure of David Attenborough.
How much poorer would this country be if Lord Dubs hadn't been in the House?
Yeah, but can I just remind? Well, Alf Dubs, there's a breakout of love and support for you. But it is what Labour's pledging in this manifesto, Shami.
Well, Alf has actually been quite diplomatic, and he hasn't spoken against that. He's saying he wants an early transition to an elected second chamber. I hear what Sonia says, and I think the reasonable debate between them highlights for me the need for a constitutional convention and for cross-party, cross-regional consensus about probably a written constitution, hopefully before I'm 80.
Right. Oh, a long way off, of course. Do you disagree with the policy then?
I don't feel very strongly about it. The policy is supposed to be a transition to an elected second chamber. I'm with Alf on the elected second chamber, but I do also agree with Sonia that if you start messing around with the constitution in this way, for example, you'd need to bolster the independent judiciary and probably give them strike-down powers.
It's a message from the Labour Party that after you're 80, you're useless. That's what they're basically
saying.
Well, that's quite brutal. Alf, would you like to respond to what you've heard?
Well, look, because I agree with Shami. Look, it's very simple. I'm there because as long as I feel I can make some contribution, and I'm not keeping anybody else out, which I'm manifestly not, then I'm going to keep going. But look, the number of people affected by this are very few, and most of them actually in the Labour Party. We're an older party because of the appointment system than the other parties.
Right.
And the actual change to the size of the Lords will not be very large. And some of the people who are over 80, some of my colleagues, are pretty effective, whether it's George Fuchs or Michael Heseltine or Attenborough or Joan Bakewell and so on. These are all people who are making a positive contribution.
Yes.
So it'd be a pity if we lost them just like that.
Well, it's a pretty sort of eminent, isn't it, group, the over 80s club in the House of Lords.
The Spectator does an octogenarian's power list now and again. I have to say, they pack quite a punch. I think, and also, okay, America's a bad example, to be honest. I think kind of 80 cut-off point might work over there. But over here, the House of Lords needs independent spirits and people who are not careerists, not looking over their shoulder at somebody's approbation.
Right.
So that's why it works.
Alf Dubs, thank you very much for joining us, doing a brilliant job, obviously, clearly, for the over 80s anywhere in the House of Lords. Anyway, that's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests. I'll be back with more Politics Live on Monday. From all of us here, bye-bye.